You cannot just learn and learn and learn. You have to identify some things that you stop doing, that you unlearn. Good morning, everyone. When you look at the title, that was actually my talent director. She came up with it because she said, you know, we need to do more. We need to talk a little bit less about the things because sometimes, you know, you don't have enough action and you don't actually implement, you know, what you have analyzed and talked about for quite a long time. So what I'm going to talk about is UPS, the culture that we have created over many, many years, but now the culture needs to change. And we have established a new target culture, and I'm going to talk also about how we get to this new target culture. And action learning is one piece that helps us drive to this new culture. And there is two different components that make up our culture. The first one is an iconic founder and leader, which is the person on the right-hand side here. His name is Jim Casey. He actually founded this company in 1907. It was a messenger business. So at that time, not a lot of people had telephones. He was in Seattle, Washington. There were two different telephone companies. He had both telephones. People called him. He wrote those messages up and then delivered them to the houses and to the recipients. This business was very quickly interrupted because lots of people got telephones. So he had to find something new. He went to retail stores and consolidated their shipments because people didn't have cars. So when you bought something in a retail store, the retail stores delivered home. So he created a business to deliver to your house, which was first with bicycles, then with motorcycles, and finally with cars as well. So Ford Model T, for example, iconic car. This business was also interrupted because many people got cars. So the retail shops moved to malls outside of the cities. People drove their cars. There was no need for consolidated deliveries. And then he went into the B2B business, business to business, from the producer to the seller to the wholesaler and so on. And this was our business for many, many years. And this business drives actually our culture as well. Because when you imagine how you have a shipment delivered from A to B, for example, you walk the streets of Brussels and you find some nice chocolates and you want to have this chocolate delivered to Budapest to your family. A UPS driver, you call, the UPS driver picks it up or you drop it at a shop. The package is always on the move, from a driver to a center, loaded in a container, consolidated to Cologne. We have our air hub there with more than 3,000 people. Loaded in an air container, flight to Budapest. Loaded in another truck, going to the center, and then actually driven to the doorstep and delivered at home. This is a big clockwork. And if something in this clockwork doesn't work, a plane gets late, you lose your landing rights at a certain point in time, the entire ripple effect that you have makes it impossible to run this network very efficiently. That's why our culture is based on high efficiency. So the iconic leader plus the efficiency are actually shaping the culture of adhering to the process, making sure that there is no risk-taking, there is no empowerment, because people need to adhere to the process in order for this clockwork to work perfectly. When you listen to David Ulrich last year, he had a masterclass and he was talking about Amazon. Amazon had exactly the same structure where the customer was actually expecting something to be delivered in time, in perfect shape, at the doorstep, in the right quantity and so on. And the process that they have implemented, which sometimes people say, you know, it's very radical versus your employees, it is exactly the same process. So, but there is more about people, because about 30 years ago, there was someone else joining this company, and you see this nice-looking gentleman. 30 years and 705 days, you can see how many different assignments I had already in my career. And this is also what makes up the culture. You move internationally, you move into different functions, and with that, you have a very, very strong organizational culture. We have a promotion from within policy. So most of our people actually have grown up within the company and are still with the company. When you look at the picture on the right-hand side down there, for example, one of our subsidiaries is Marken. They are in clinical trials. And clinical trials is a business where Marken is Six Sigma certified, which means they can have 3 failures out of 1 million shipments. It's about a person that is in a cancer study and some specimen needs to be delivered to a laboratory. You cannot fail this because the person might get out of this study. There is, for example, individualized medication produced just for you. It needs to be temperature controlled, humidity controlled. All of this adds to the same process-driven culture that we face. Now, this culture made us very successful in the past years. We have a high margin, about 2 to 3 times our competitors, and the structure that we had with all these buildings, airplanes, vehicles, and so on, were high barriers to entry. It made it almost impossible for our competitors that were not, for example, in the US, where we really have a duopoly, to enter. About 15 years ago, beginning of the years 2000, one of the competitors tried to enter the US market, but the investments were so high that they pulled out after they have lost about $10 billion. So barriers to entry extremely high, very defined culture, no flexibility. And now you have these external disruptors that are coming and they are changing our industry. E-commerce, for example. I told you most of the business is B2B. Now, B2C, business to consumer, is growing like 3 times the B2B volume. You have the gig economy, and Uber is a perfect example how, together like with Airbnb, how they changed the bias of customers. Before, your car was private. Before, your apartment was private. Taxi, that was public. Hotel room, that was public. But now, just with an app, it's nothing else but an app behind, the entire bias has changed, and all of a sudden, you can offer your car and make money with it. It's not private anymore. You make it public. You can offer your apartment or your house and make money with it. It's also not private anymore. Uber could be a competitor of ours. No assets anymore. They are not needed to enter this market. When you look at Amazon, they were our shipper. I mean, lots of volume in the US and so on. Now, all of a sudden, they create their own network. Urbanization. Cities get bigger and bigger, so the retailers move close to those cities, and they can offer services that don't need us to transport things cross borders and cross the globe. And with that, your customer expectations change significantly. Your customers want flexibility right now. Your customers want personalization. If you know a shipment is on your way, I'm not at home. You want to change it on the fly. Should I move it to a shop? Do I want to have it at work? Do you want to have it delivered at 8 o'clock at night or on Saturday or on Sunday? All of these things require significant changed culture because all of a sudden you need to be agile, you need to be flexible, you need to come up with innovative solutions, you need to have a lot of digital tools and provide visibility. And all of this is changing the way we are working. Our decision-making needs to be really at the front line and not at the headquarters anymore, because this is where the things happen and this is where things need to change. So it's about risk-taking and it's about speed as well. Now, the question was, are we ready for change? And what you see here is the OHI. OHI is a tool from McKinsey. It's the Organizational Health Index. And with that, you compare your company to thousands of other companies with regards to a lot of different elements. This is just an extract. So these are the 4 areas we think we need to work on, because this is how we can drive a change in our culture. If your people are not motivated to change, then your change will not be successful. So motivation, innovation and learning, work environment, and external orientation. External orientation specifically for Europe, because we scored lower in external orientation than our partners overseas. And the work environment, for example, is not necessarily, how does your office look like or things. It's really a social environment. And Vineet this morning talked about transparency as well, and how important it is to be transparent to your employees. We made all of this transparent. This is just the quantitative results, but we also have qualitative results. And with the qualitative results, which were like 10,000s of comments of our employees, we were able to look at our culture and how we need to shift from where we were to where we want to be. Because some of the things that you see on the left-hand side under current, plus this overlap current and desired, shows you on the climate what the culture looked like for the employees. On the left-hand side, what we need to shed, and in the middle, what we need to keep, and look at the desired culture and see how we combine this. So this is really the journey from yesterday, today, to tomorrow. And what our people told us was really authoritative environment, lack of communication, lack of motivation. There need to be more opportunities to develop and grow, and we are not leveraging for innovation enough, and so on. So the goal was really to move this to the right-hand side, skip the ones on the left-hand side, and focus on connecting, empowering our people, providing ownership, and so on. The issue is the core of the business has still not changed. You still expect this business to work like a clockwork. So you still need to follow processes very diligently, but at the same time allow for freedom to act in order to react agile to the environment that we are in. It's really a transition phase that we are going through, where we are figuring out how we can move to the right-hand side. So the idea is really to keep what made us successful in the past, but then add what will make us successful in the future. And here is all the different areas we looked at. On the analytics side, it was not only this OHI, it was also our employee surveys, leadership assessments that we had, and other analysis. And we looked at the target culture more or less with it's kind of the SHINE model, where we already looked at some areas to change. For example, you look at simple things like your policies, procedure, artifacts, change your dress code, give more budget to the countries in order to decide freely, and so on. Try to show people that you empower them. But then the core of the idea was really, how can we identify these behaviors that will, if we exemplify those behaviors, change our underlying assumptions over time? Because the core of a cultural change is always, how do you get to these underlying assumptions that are just for granted truth, especially if they are shared. If everyone in the company thinks exactly the same, then no one will challenge it. And if you look at the culture I described to you, promotion from within, 60-year-long you had the same CEO. We only had 9 CEOs since. All of them grew up within the company. There is a lot of shared assumptions that are really difficult to change. So we have identified 8 high-impact behaviors that are going to drive this change. And these interventions are like, we have a change model where everyone can participate. It's non-hierarchical. We train people. We call out bright spots and recognize if people show the right behavior. And we also have some senior leaders that go through personal change journeys and then talk about it. But the most important thing that we found is actually action learning. And while all of this sounds nice and sounds like a nice project and probably a nice roadmap to change, unlearning is extremely difficult. And Alvin Toffler, who was an American writer, futurist, and businessman, he created this term information overload. You cannot just learn and learn and learn. You have to identify some things that you stop doing, that you unlearn. And that is very difficult with our population with this long seniority. So the challenge is really when I talk to some of the people and I look them in the eyes and say, here is these behaviors that I want you to, to do in the future. And they say, I'm already doing exactly that. And you need to call out, you are actually not, you are actually doing exactly the opposite, but your self-reflection and self-awareness is probably not at that level. It's quite difficult conversations, but it is needed in order to get people think differently and then behave differently as well. So we have to get to their hearts and minds in order to do this. But now let's talk a little bit about action learning, because action learning we have seen as most impactful in changing those behaviors, and with those behaviors also changing then the culture in the company. Has any one of you already worked with action learning or has action learning sets in their company? Okay, it's a very interesting methodology that was developed originally by Reg Revans. When I read about him, the most funny thing I thought is that he was knighted by the Belgian king. Because after his teaching at Manchester University, he moved to Belgium, he did a lot of research here, and obviously he was very famous in Belgium as well. Action learning is working on real-life business issues, but also on individual development. We have the teams in action learning are called action learning sets. They are normally between 6 and 8 people, and our teams are cross-functional, cross-national, cross-generational, and cross-hierarchical. So across all levels, you bring people together. At the beginning, and we heard this before from Mark, teams need a good start and need to be, supported initially. We teach them certain questioning styles. Feeling questions, doing questions, thinking questions. We talk to them about their learning styles. So reflector, pragmatist, activist, theorist. Which is important because this is how teams work together. If you are in a team with 5 activists and you are a reflector, you will never be able to speak because they always jump to conclusions, they always talk. But if everyone knows what learning styles people have, you just set your ground rules. You say, okay, now let's just pause for a minute and everyone needs to contribute. We have inside-ins with experts on the business opportunities the teams are working on. But also they visit a lot of different companies outside. Companies that went through transformation, companies that are customers of ours, companies that have latest technology, or just companies that work in a very different area. And you try, with some questioning and so on, find fresh and new solutions to your business problems. And then in addition, we also have a leadership challenge with every time, and the ego stays outside, and it's very confidential what stays inside. Every time one person talks about their leadership challenge and the other people are questioning, open-ended question, non-judgmental, and learning questions. And with that, people come up with new ideas of how to work on their challenge. So it has so far been extremely successful in Europe. We have 3 different levels. One is like super specialist to manager level, which is within a country. We have one team that is country managers across Europe and senior directors. And then we have another team globally that is called Senior Leadership Development Team that is kind of action learning on steroids. It's with external facilitators, it's with external mentors, it's with the IESE Business School to get some academical background in there. And it's a team of 24 people globally, and they travel actually US, Europe, APAC, in order to have outside-ins with companies and to learn from a global environment. I actually happen to be part of this this year. Now, so far in Europe, 150 participants. Some of the business challenge you see here. The interesting thing is very often our subject matter experts that are owner of some of these business challenges come back when the team comes with a solution and say, I would have never thought about this. Because you are so within your silo that people don't think outside of the silo. We have now also decided to budget every year 50,000 euros so that the two teams with the best solutions get some funding and can start piloting and so on. So far, we always had to go through a business review process in order to make sure it makes sense. What you see on the picture here is also the teams just after they have presented to our European board. So we'll bring them all to Europe, to Brussels. You know, they can present in front of the president and the board, and you see they're all extremely happy when they do this. What they also tell us is important because it addresses in their development three main areas. It's their perspective, so breadth of perspective, empowered to challenge the system and so on, getting a fresh perspective, an outside-in view, but also their performance, their willingness to self-development, develop for the future and so on. And then a lot of different skills like communication, influence, reflection, collaboration, and decision-making. And when I come back to the 8 behaviors that we have, that I mentioned before, that how we want to drive this culture, you can see how they fit very well into the theme of action learning. They are inspire innovation, build trust, enable ownership, focus on the customer, share our vision, risk-taking, encourage collaboration, and appreciate and recognize. You already see that these are the themes that are really exemplified by those teams. And those action learning sets take about 6 to 10 months, which also means a behavioral change, if you do this over this period of time, is really solid. So you see, this is about the development of our people, but this development also drives our cultural change. And these people are not only the 150 that benefit from it, because it's management employees across all different levels. And if they go back to their teams, business units, and they tell their people what they have experienced, and if they call out bright spots, the right behaviors, and they are calling out the blind spots and say, you should not behave in such a way, you have this multiplier effect, and it drives change across all hierarchies. And this is one of the beauties of actually this system. Now, after the success in Europe, we have also rolled this out in the US and in Asia. So we made it from a European model to drive change here, a global model to drive change across the entire company.